Hey there, what's going on? Welcome to ngAir. I'm your host, Justin Schwarzenberger, and on today's episode, we have a 2-for-1. We're going to be covering some Angular lifecycle methods, concepts, and things there. And then we're also going to get to hear about some upcoming NgRx features that are in the next release. So it should be pretty cool as usual. We're looking forward to it. So let's meet our panelists, and then we'll say hi to our guests, and then we'll get into the content. Joining us today, we have Austin McDaniel. Austin, what's going on? Hey, Austin.
Who are you calling, Austin?
He's dialing in.
I was dialing in.
From 1997.
How's it going, everyone?
Awesome, awesome. Bonnie, what's going on, Bonnie?
Hi, I'm from joining you from Amsterdam today, and I'm very excited. And I'm also excited because my friend Wes, and I've been looking forward to that. I've been talking to Wes on Twitter for a while. Oh, I did it again. Oh my goodness, Justin. I don't even know how you let me get away with it. I'm really sorry.
No, I forget. I'm supposed to introduce you as the last panelist so that
because
that was my bad.
Okay, so anyway, I'm very excited about the mystery guest that you have on today because he's really cool, and I shall not say his name. I'm sorry, Justin.
It's all good. It's all good. It's not, you're
so patient with me.
For sure. No problem. Mike, what's going on, Mike?
Not too much. Just ready to chat about something. I don't want to say anything more than that. Just excited for a good chat today.
About something with someone and some stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Very generic. Let's use some pronouns.
What are you guys talking about?
I know, it's great. It's just, I don't know. It's out of control. Our guest today, Wes Grimes. What's going on, Wes?
Not much. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you. We're stoked. Why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself so they can get familiar with you, what you got going on, and then we'll dive into the content.
Yeah. So I am just starting a new role, actually. I'll start out with that. I'm excited. I'm going to be a senior engineer at Narwhal, start at the end of the month.
Woo-hoo.
And yeah, really excited about that, to work with Jeff and Victor and everyone there.
I think it's a conspiracy. You tell them I said it's a conspiracy because every time I make friends with somebody on Twitter, Narwhal hires them. It's happened too many times for it to be a coincidence. I think it's not a coincidence.
Moral of the story is become friends with Bonnie and then you go places. So
they hire all the cool people.
So yeah, aside from that, I write a lot. I love writing. Write for Angular in depth and Ultimate courses, and I've done some personal writing of my own as well, just on my blog. And
can you do some writing for me? I need some documentation, some TDD.
Sure.
Justin did some writing.
I'll write about.
I was actually pretty stoked about Justin. Justin wrote like sci-fi stories. It's cool.
Oh, that's cool.
I thought so.
Yeah. So aside from writing, you'll probably, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll probably see pictures of like food and cooking. My wife and I are really big into that.
Yes, you always do this at dinner time. I don't know how many times I've going through, and I'm like, you're killing me because it's mouth-watering. Yeah, you really should either make enough for all of us, Wes, or I mean, come on, you're just torturing us.
Anybody is always welcome to come down to Florida and hang out for barbecue. So. Definitely.
Don't say that too loud. Austin might show up.
Yeah.
I actually might show up personally if you keep posting those pictures.
Hey, Wes.
Yeah.
So if somebody wanted to follow you on Twitter, how could they find you on Twitter?
Yeah, it's just at Wes Grimes, WESGRIMES. So you can find me there. And I'm also on, Angular in Depth, Ultimate courses, those sites. And my personal website is wesleygrimes.com. So somebody had taken Wes Grimes. Apparently there's another one of me out there. So
what's your Xbox gamer tag in case we want to play Fortnite with you?
Oh God, I think it's Agent Grimes. So it's been a while. Yeah, so that's how you can find me online. I'm normally tweeting about, like I said, cooking, maybe some pictures of sunsets and Angular tidbits. So that's normally what I'm doing.
Awesome. Hey, before we get into the content, you organize, or you were part of, I forget, you can remind me, the like a writing summit at ngConf. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did do that.
I want to hear a little more about that real quick before we get started.
Yeah, I've noticed, and you guys probably have too, like technical writing, blogging has really kind of taken off. Again, it's, 10 years ago, it kind of came around. It feels like it's coming back again. It's so easy to get into it. And I've noticed a lot of people doing it. And so I kind of wanted to get a community around that. There's a lot of these kind of fragmented, if you're an Angular writer, you go here. If you're a React writer, you go to this area. I kind of want to pull it all together. If you need somebody just to peer review your article or just a second pair of eyes, so that kind of thing, and try to come up with some standard ways of doing things. So at ngConf this year, the organizers were gracious enough to give me a room to actually host like a conference within a conference. And we had, I want to say, 6 people come and speak. And it was a really cool, dynamic set of speakers talking on all different kinds of topics. And, anything from like technical writing for non-native English speakers to how to publish your own blog with the Jamstack. It's slipping my mind. Kind of grammatical ways to format your grammar using like Grammarly and things like that. So I think it was a success. We actually had quite a big turnout. I mean, not everybody is into writing, and more people are into wanting to come to the coding type sessions, but there was quite a few people there. And I'm planning. I'm really thinking about turning it into its own one-day conference eventually. Being open to anybody, not just Angular. I mean, we're on Angular Air today, but I mean, any kind of technical writing, folks can come out and be a part of that. So
that's really cool. I wonder about doing like a virtual conference to start with, right? Where you do like just a virtual day and have virtual sessions or something that everybody could kind of hop onto. Yeah,
I think that's a great idea. It's a lot easier for people to join from all over the world, and a lot more cost effective and all that. So definitely.
Yeah, because I wasn't at ngConf, so I was bummed, but I would totally have attended that for sure.
Yeah.
So talking on that whole writing thing, you recently wrote a blog post, more than one blog post about lifecycle management stuff in English. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I remember reading the OnDestroy one and checking that out, and that's kind of what the initial prompt of getting this episode going, right? So maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, that started with some, like most things do when you're writing, at least I do, is a problem you encounter at work, right? And you had to solve that issue. And so I was expecting OnDestroy to perform in a way that it wasn't actually doing. And so in that I said, man, I really should dive in and understand how these things work, really understand what's going on. And so in doing that, I wrote a tweet, what I call like a hot tip tweet, kind of like a mini blog post in a way, just to gauge interest. And got a lot of interest, a lot of retweets and likes on that. And so I decided to turn it into an article. And then from there, I talked to the guys and gals at Ultimate Courses and decided that we wanted to turn it into a series. And so I'm 2 articles into that. We've got OnDestroy and OnInit. I'm going to be working on changes next, I think. So, and I'll just work through them. And I try, the way I do my articles, I try to keep them very real world, like how does this apply to you in your day-to-day life, not the abstract type stuff. And so you'll find I try to put real world examples in there and flow that way. And so, at the end of the episode today, I mean, honestly, I'll point to those as good references to what we're going to just kind of touch on today.
Nice. When we talk about the life cycle events, maybe we can kind of give a quick overview for people who might not be aware of them, or get some detail about what we're talking about with that.
Yeah. Life cycle, they're basically, it's a way that Angular gives you to run certain code at certain times in the life cycle of a component or a directive or a service, so that you can hook in. I mean, React has, the similar concept, all that's changing with the hooks thing, but the component did mount, component will unmount, those types of things. I would consider those lifecycle hooks as well. And so in the Angular world, at runtime, kind of just a high level, it looks for a method named ngOnInit, for example, on your component. And if it finds it, it executes it at the appropriate time in the cycle. And so that's really all we're talking about here. It's just those methods and when they're called and what are some best use cases for those. What are common reasons you would want to, implement those hooks. So
Nice.
So what is so you talked about that. How did that not work how you were expecting then?
So in my naive mind, I was expecting OnDestroy to be called when I closed the tab on the browser. And so you would think it would, but in reality, it doesn't get called. And so, if for instance, you want to prevent somebody from closing a page if they have unsaved data on a form, it's not necessarily going to be always called that way. And so that was an interesting thing for me. Also, you might have some kind of a, server-side method that you need to call from your component to clean up something or to log out or, automatically or different things like that. And so if you want those to happen, like on a page refresh, for example, it doesn't happen. I mean, it doesn't necessarily call the OnDestroy during that time. And maybe that's not the way that, Angular intended for that method to be used. But just, Joe Schmo coming in, looking at it, okay, this gets called when it's destroyed, so why can't I do it there? And so that's what started my kind of journey into it.
Very cool. Very cool. So you want to kind of talk a little bit more about that? Do you have some?
And before, sorry to interrupt, Justin. Before you go on, can you tell us the tidbit of how you actually do that?
You want me to give away my
Oh, that's later? Wait, are you just saying that?
No, I'm gonna actually I'll give you go ahead and give it away. That's fine. And then I can show you in detail.
For everyone
I gotta tell the people watching because they missed it on the pre-show. We warned Wes that Austin was gonna give him a hard time. And we told Wes that if Austin says that, you just say, don't worry, that'll come later.
Yeah, okay, don't worry.
Now we don't know if Wes is really gonna cover this or not. We shouldn't have given you, that was bad advice, Wes. No, I can't handle the suspense.
No, I'm cool. We can talk about it. So basically, and there may be those folks out there that would call this a hack, or maybe you shouldn't do this. But basically, you have this concept in Angular of a host listener decorator that you can put on top of methods. And so I just I popped one on top of my OnDestroy and listened to the window on before unload event. And so
that really sounds like the beginning of a hip hop song.
Yeah.
I popped one into OnDestroy. Yeah.
Bonnie.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Before you go further, Bonnie. For those people who may not have used them before, do you want to give a quick?
I thought you were about to say for those people who don't know what hip hop is.
No, for people who have not used host listener.
Yeah. That basically it's just like you have other decorators in Angular TypeScript where you can do an at input or an at output or different things like that, or the at component that lives on top of the class in Angular. On top of individual methods in your class, you can put a host listener, and what you do is you give it the DOM event you want to listen on, and when that DOM event fires, it calls your method. And then you can also tie in and if that DOM event has event args, maybe if it's like on a keyboard or key down event or something, you can pass those event args in and make use of them. So that's what host listener is.
Gotcha. So, yeah, the way, and as a great explanation. The only thing I like to think of it is you can subscribe to different events or handle different events in your component by using the parentheses around a method or an event name and call it. But if you want to be able to bind to an event that may not be firing from within your component, is how you use the host listener.
So some other cool tips here.
What?
You can actually do like keydown.enter, right? So, but a quick reminder on that is don't do every key because it's actually creating an event listener for each one. So we would rather do event delegation there so that we're not going to be hooking up all those binds.
Yep.
Why are you laughing, Brock?
Premature optimizations, buddy.
What are you talking about? Event listeners and destroyers are very expensive.
I know. Yeah. So if you have a lot of different keys you want to listen to, maybe have one global one that listens to all, and then filter the events coming within there.
I feel like Brocky's, like his components probably have like every key, like A, B, C, D, E, F.
All right, now we're getting out of control.
Yeah, this is where RxJS will save our butts, in that scenario for sure. So
Absolutely.
Cool. Yeah. So host listeners can be powerful, but like you say, if misused, they can be a source of memory leaks and weirdness. So you have to be careful with them. But yeah. So you want me to dive in further, Justin, into? I got some slides I can show with the viewers and the panelists, just so everybody can get an idea of what those all the different lifecycle hooks that exist out there.
Yeah, sure, that sounds great.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me know if you get it.
Yep, looks good.
All right, so we covered about me already and my beautiful face, so we'll move on. I failed to mention I'm also on the NgRx core team now. Me and Alex Shruko, I think I said that correctly, Alex. I'm sorry if I didn't. Have joined to help out all the other folks on the team. So that has been keeping us busy in our free time. So jumping back into lifecycle hooks, here's actually the full list, and you guys can see that okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. So, and these are actually, I pulled this right from Angular's docs. I like to always refer people when I'm teaching things. Always go to the docs first. They're really, really good. And the new version 8 docs are even better. They've got a fantastic example app in there. And it kind of really walks through the real world use cases and such. But with lifecycle hooks, pull this from there, and these are really the order in which Angular would call them in the life cycle of a component per se. And so, the first kind of thing that jumps out to people that might be, make them take pause is, why is on changes called before OnInit? You would think OnInit would be the very first thing. And really kind of the short answer is that is called when any input properties that you have are set or reset, and so those get first called, or sorry, on changes is called right at the beginning when if you have inputs to be there, and then it calls on init to move on, and that's an important distinction to make too when we kind of dig in a little further as to why it's safe to use inputs in on init, right? Because they're available because on changes has run before OnInit. Then, and I'm not really going to go into these other, 3 through 7 today. I'll dig into those as I go through my article series that I'm writing. But know that those are there, and the documentation on the Angular site's great. And then the last one is the OnDestroy, which we'll talk about today as well. And we've talked about a little bit. That's called right at the very end of the cycle. So. And again, I talked about this earlier, but what is a lifecycle hook? I kind of just say it's a method that's called by the Angular runtime during a certain point in the lifecycle of your application, right? And how do you implement one? Well, there's really kind of two things. One of them is optional. Really, it's a matter of on your component, and I say component, these can be used in other places as well. You create a method that has a specific name, right? And so OnInit, OnDestroy, all those, that's the hook, but the method name is prefixed with a lowercase ng, right? And so you would just create a method called ngOnInit, and then inside that method, your logic could be implemented. There is an optional choice that on a class, if you're on a component, for example, where you can do, let's say it's my component, is the name of your class. You can put the word implements after it and actually implement the specific, OnInit, OnDestroy, those types of contracts. And the benefit to doing that is you get type safety. So some people don't do it. I like to do it just for completeness and type safety, so that if I put implements OnInit and I don't have an ngOnInit method on my component, then it's going to tell me that I haven't implemented it properly, right? So.
Yeah, I really like the use of the interface for the kind of two key reasons, right? Is that naming of it. So you make sure that by implementing an interface, you make sure that you have the correct naming of ngOnInit. I think it's real easy to just name it OnInit and think you've got the lifecycle, right? Yeah. And the other thing is for ones like on changes, the payload that it receives, the parameters that it receives, we can get typing and understand what that is receiving, right?
Exactly.
Cool.
That is exactly right. So, we'll dive into OnInit first, unless anyone has any questions before I do that. So
that's an it.
All right.
So bad.
So what are some common use cases? The first one is really kind of assigning your observables. Some people argue, no, I just do that, when I declare my property, for example, and I'll hop over to some code in a minute to show you. For me, I do it in the OnInit because it's a standard place. I work with a team of guys and girls that basically we all go to the same place to know where these observables are assigned. It's also, in some cases, you might want to be using input properties, that are coming into your child component, per se. And if you don't do them in the OnInit, they may not be available yet. And so that's where I like to do my assignments. And so when I say assignments, I mean, for example, let's say you have a service call that goes and gets some data from an HTTP, right? You would just assign your, my data, $, equals, and then that service call. That would happen in the OnInit. Like I said earlier, a second ago, it's also a good place to work with input properties. If you need to do something with inputs coming in, that you're assured that if they're going to be there, that they'll be there, right? So if you've passed down an input property, they will be available in the ngOnInit.
Can I add something to that really quick too?
Sure.
Another thing that I really like about that is that it allows you to instantiate classes like in a test, right? In a test case, you can instantiate that component class and not have to worry about that other logic running because it's not in the constructor, right? So now you have more control as your unit testing with when you want and expect things to happen, right?
That's right. That's right. And there's actually, that's a good point you brought that up, because a lot of people get confused about when to use constructor versus OnInit. And there's a lot of great articles. There's a good one on Ultimate Courses. Max at Angular in Depth has written a great one. But basically, kind of the consensus that I'm seeing is you want to use the constructor for dependency injection only. And then ngOnInit is when you actually want to put your initialization logic at. And like you said, Justin, it does help with testing and that kind of thing. Another good use case for OnInit is if you want to access route parameters. That would be a good place to do that. And then some other use cases, if we're setting up subscriptions that, for whatever reason, and I'll dive into this in a minute, but if there's a reason that you have to manually subscribe to an observable, which disclaimer, we always say, go out of your way to not do that. Use the pipe async, right? But there's sometimes you just can't, get around it. Then in that case, that would be where you would set up your subscriptions to manage a manual subscription array or something that you can then unsubscribe from in OnDestroy. You can decorate, or I say decorate. You can put async in front of really any of the lifecycle methods. So and this kind of doesn't become as powerful of something nowadays because we're using observables so much. But when Angular 2 kind of first came out, promises were used more, and so this was a powerful way to you could decorate your OnInit method with async, and then you could do await and get your data back right there in kind of almost like a C# world kind of way, just by decorating with async. Not decorating, but putting async in front of the method name. I always, as kind of a best practice, at least that I've learned, when you're dealing with reactive forms and you're building those using the form builder to build those forms, I tend to do that in the OnInit, or at least I call, I'll create a method called build form that's in my class, but I'll call that from my OnInit method, so that it really only happens when the component is first initialized. And so I'll just hop over real quick and we'll look at, before we jump into OnDestroy, we'll look at some of the things I was talking about, just so we have that. Can you guys see my VS Code okay?
Yep.
Okay, so when I'm teaching stuff, I like to keep it lighthearted. So there's this really fun API out there that's called the Chuck Norris Database API. And it basically gives you back random Chuck Norris jokes. And it's CORS friendly, so you don't have to set up a backend to call it. So this little app basically has a service with one method on it that's called get jokes. And basically I'm saying, give me back a random list of 5 jokes that are limited to the nerdy category. So, like Chuck Norris can dereference null. That's one of them. Yeah, super nerdy. I hear all the laughs from you guys. So, and so that's this service. That's what, that's what it's doing, is return observable of an array of jokes, right? And my joke is just, it's just an ID and the text to the joke. So if we go back to my component, we were talking about OnInit, right? And so just how would I implement OnInit on this component? Well, I would just go ahead and type, the word implements right here, and then, OnInit, and then I'll let VS Code auto import it for me by hitting enter. So as we were talking about earlier, once you do that, you get that type safety. All of a sudden my app component's underlined and it's saying, hey, you've incorrectly implemented the interface. And so you can actually come right here and say, if you hit the little light bulb, you can say implement interface, and it'll throw the code in there for you. I'm gonna pull it below my constructor just because I like to have it below that. And then in here, this is where we could do that initialization logic. And so I'm going to purposely write this with a memory leak. So I don't want Austin chiming in and saying, hey, wait a minute. but we'll tweak it in a second here. But let's say we call our, our get jokes method, and then we do a .subscribe, right? And then we get back our jokes, and we can set our local jokes array equal to the response from that, right? So we're doing some initialization logic here so that when this app boots up, or bootstraps, it's going to make a call. It's going to call this ngOnInit lifecycle method for us, and set the jokes property equal to the response from the service call. And then just so you can see, basically I've got a parent and child component scenario where I've got a joke list with an input property of jokes. And then inside of that, I have kind of an ngFor to loop over those jokes that are passed down and render a joke item for each one that has an input. So it's kind of 3 levels going on there. And if we run this real quick, I'm going to be brave and run code live while I'm demoing. Can't promise it won't break. Or even not start. Come on, buddy. But basically, you know, so this would be the first pass. The second pass is let's actually look at this a different way and use maybe the async pipe, and then just do our assignment of our observable here. So I'll show you the transformation into that once this runs. All right. All right, so when it first booted up, we get our joke. Chuck Norris can spawn threads that complete before they're started. No one has ever pair programmed with Chuck Norris and lived to tell it. I feel like we could replace Chuck Norris's name with Austin's name, and it would fit just fine.
I'm not very good at paired programming. We'll say that.
I will say not very many people come on this show and actually give Austin a hard time specifically, and I'm really digging it.
Yeah, just for the sake of doing that, you can come back to do a different show about each LifeCycle event.
Okay, I'm down.
Are we still talking about Angular?
Yeah. So, okay, so we got our jokes, right? And now let's take it a step further and because this created a memory leak, right? I mean, in theory it did. I think we're okay because it's an HTTP call and it's only going to send one observable. But if, for example, it was something that didn't complete, you would continue to get that, and every time the component initialized, you would have another subscription happening there, right? And so before I turn this into using an observable, let's show capturing it, and you know, just for sake of time, kind of pull in the OnDestroy here and show you a use case for that. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. So, because I could talk for a long time, and I don't want to take people's. I want to talk about ngRx too. So,
I heard if you named your component Chuck Norris component, that OnDestroy can't destroy it.
That's funny.
Did you just make that up? That was pretty good.
I did.
Yeah.
You would never find that joke in a Chuck Norris book. That was pretty good, Mike. I'll give you $1 for that one.
Is there an endpoint for that
In Denver.
filtering by Angular specific Chuck Norris jokes? Because
That would be great, wouldn't it? I don't think so.
There's a whole Angular ahead of time compiler that just rewrites your code to Chuck Norris style.
Okay, so I'm gonna just create I'm gonna show the manual way of managing the subscription and unsubscribing it, and then we'll kind of talk about some other ways. It's a very popular topic, cleaning up memory leaks, and there's some really opinionated people out there on Twitter about, you know, my way is the only right way, and, you know, so forth. I'll just leave it out there. You know, do what works best for your team, but just make sure you're in some way unsubscribing, because if you don't, you're going to have some really funky behavior, especially once you go live with it and it's out in the real world and users are using it in unexpected ways. So here's the deal, right? We're subscribing on our OnInit, but we're not actually unsubscribing. And so to do that, we first need to capture that subscription. And so I'm just going to say sub equals that. Sorry, this dot sub equals that, right? And So that captures my subscription. Now let's add our OnDestroy, same way we added our OnInit. And then we can click the little light bulb here. Get that out of the way. And I'll pull my method down. Right, and then so this will get called at the end. And so basically, you know, I could just say this dot sub dot unsubscribe, right? But that might not always work for you. There may be scenarios where this subscription only happens when a button's clicked or some other event happens. And so it's always good to first check if that's been initialized. So you can use the JavaScript truthy check, you know, if this dot sub, and then if you have one, do your unsubscribe, right? And so then the great thing here is on OnInit, we're grabbing our joke, you know, subscribing to our joke service and setting a local property. And then we're holding a reference to that subscription. And then in our OnDestroy, we're checking if that reference is set and then unsubscribing. And so that cleans up the memory leak, right?
I like the fact that in your destroy, you're not optimistic that sub is set, even though you're calling it within init, you're still doing that check.
Yeah, I just, you know, it's just good practice in my opinion. Because maybe down the road, another developer comes in and moves this somewhere else, you know, and then all of a sudden your OnDestroy may throw a nasty error because, you know, unsubscribe is not a method of undefined or something, right? You'd probably get.
Yep.
So then, you know, just taking a little further, some other ways that folks are handling this is you could have more than one subscription. So, and I'll shout out to Ben Lesh on this. I took his workshop, his RX workshop with Tracy at ngConf this year, and I learned something new. Because in the past, what I would do is I would just say, let's say I have multiple subscriptions. I would just create an array, and I would call this subs, like that. And then I would just say this dot subs dot add. Sorry, push. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Right, and then down here, I could say if this dot subs and this dot subs. Maybe I'm being a little bit too cautious here. Then I could do subs dot for each sub unsubscribe. And then it would loop through. And if I had more than one subscription going on here, for whatever reason, to different things, it would loop through and unsubscribe from each one of those automatically. So that's another way to do it. I've seen another way would be to create a replay subject that's called destroyed, and then use a take until operator. And so let me show you that really quick. And I'll show you kind of a caveat to using that method. You might run into some issues, but so basically, let's just create a replay subject. I won't get into what replay subjects are. You can find plenty of articles that go into that.
Subjects are awesome. That's what they are.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you can use them to do the whole service with a subject thing, right? I think so. So let's create a new, sorry, let's type it first. Replay subject. I'll just say it's a Boolean. And then we just need to give it a buffer size of 1, right? And then what we can do, let's back out of our extra items here. Then we can just do this. We can use some RxJS, and so we can do a dot pipe. And I'll pop these on the line. And we can do the take until operator. And basically, I can come in here and I can say this dot destroyed, right? And then, so what that's saying is allow the observable to push values through this chain until a value comes and is emitted from this observable. I think I said that right.
Yeah. So the switch there is, instead of managing the subscription, you're causing the observable to complete, in which case you don't need to subscribe because it'll clean itself up.
Exactly. And then in my OnDestroy, it just becomes a this.destroy.next true. Oops. And then for safety, you can complete that observable, right? Kind of so for me, I don't know. It's a similar amount of code. It's a little less like clear what's going on in my mind. For some people, it's more clear. The key though is if you've got pipe going on here and you've got multiple operators happening, I think there becomes an issue if you don't take until your last operator, then it may not actually complete. And so you would run into an issue if you did that. And so kind of, imagine you've got a huge component with all these different pipes and subscriptions. A dev comes in and decides to move or add a new operator after take until, then all of a sudden what you're assuming is happening down here in OnDestroy, it doesn't work anymore. So that's just something, I throw out there. I do know a lot of people that use this and swear by it. So that's another method. There's even more. So Ward Bell, I think Ward Bell just did on his own or with his team, created something called SubSync. It's an NPM library, and you can check that out in the show notes. I'll bring that up, or I'll send that to you guys. And I believe Thomas Burleson is working on something called Until View Destroyed. And so he's working on, I think he's going to try to get a package and repo and everything published this week. That'll be yet another way to kind of manage cleaning up these memory leaks. So I think that, let me hop back over to the slides. We talked about, and the last thing I'll say about that is, if you let Angular do the work for you, then you don't have to do this in the first place, right? If you come in here and we actually, if we created an observable here called jokes $ observable of joke array, then we can get rid of the local jokes property. We can get rid of our subs and our destroyed. We can get rid of our ng on destroy. And we can initialize our observable, like kind of assign it here to our get jokes call. Important thing here, if you're new to RxJS observables, this is not actually firing, right? This is just assigning it so that when something, it's not until you do the .subscribe that it actually makes that call. And so get rid of that. And so really, the magic happens in the template. And so on OnInit, we've assigned our jokes, and if people ask, what is the $? I think Ben Lesh said it's called finish notation is where that came from. It's just a way to know that that variable you're working with is an observable. I mean, we have TypeScript to tell us that, but it's kind of a pattern I follow. So if we go back to our app component, then we can do this magic thing here where we can say jokes $pipe async, and then Angular automatically subscribes and unsubscribes to that observable for us. And we no longer have to worry about managing that ourselves. So moral of the story is use pipe async whenever possible, but if you can't get away from it, make sure you clean up your subscriptions.
Hey, Wes, can we go back to the class file real quick?
Sure.
I have a question and discussion point real quick. So we happen to know that this joke service is making an HTTP call, right, to the HTTP client. So we're aware that the get call to that is going to complete after it calls once, right? So we don't necessarily need to unsubscribe from that because it's going to complete. But because that's behind this joke service, maybe we don't know that it's going to complete in time. And that's one, I think, one of the challenges, right? When we talk about subscribing and when do we need to unsubscribe? Like, how do we know? Like, how do we get intelligence or information about the service that we're subscribing to if we need to unsubscribe or not? So like the kind of stuff that you had in there in terms of the unsubscribe, because we're making an HTTP client call, we wouldn't necessarily need to do that. But now that you put it into the async pipe, like, we don't even really need to think about that anymore, because if it completes automatically, that's handled. If it doesn't, it handles subscribing. So now it's just kind of out of our realm that we need to worry about that. So that's kind of another nice plus about the async pipe.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's probably a whole show we could do about just the async pipe if you haven't already. Different patterns and practices for that, but it's very powerful and I use it heavily. So.
Nice. Very cool.
All right. So
all right. We've got about 10 minutes left. So
okay.
More stuff you want to squeeze in here and still be able to have time to talk about the upcoming features of NgRx, or?
Yeah, we've covered everything LifeCycle wise. So I'll just kind of plug real quick. If you go to ultimatecourses.com, and then there's I'll just hop over here. There's a blog link on the upper right hand corner. A lot of great writers are writing on here, and kind of the thing that we're following is we're trying to write series of things, and so not just one-offs, but there's a GraphQL series, there's an Angular LifeCycle hooks series, there's a web.
Oh, you have Corey Ryland. I love Corey Ryland.
Yeah, Corey's great.
Right, he is.
Yeah.
Tell him we miss him. I haven't seen Corey in forever.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of people. Yeah, lots of great people on here. You'd be surprised. So these are these are the articles. So you can hop in from the front page and hit blog and get to them, or they'll be available in the slides at the end. But just kind of the flow of the articles. I just like we did in the talk today. I go through how to use it, and then lots of code examples. I love doing code examples because that's where you really start to learn it. So those are good. I think that's it. So for Ultimate courses and all that.
Nice. All right. So yeah, there we go. Okay.
We got it. I was laughing because Justin was like making sure we're fitting everything into this episode because we got to get our money's worth out of this.
I'm more than happy to come back anytime too. So.
Did you call your parents right away, Wes, when they made you when they put you on the NgRx team?
No, I waited a little bit just to make sure it would stick. So
I would feel like everybody. Like, do you know how cool I am? Let me tell you.
Yeah, man, I'm the least cool person on that team. There's some really cool people on there, so it's great to work with them. So NgRx.
Samantha taught me how to pronounce Okrushko. And it's easy, Mike. You just have to say the word crush in the middle. Alex, Okrushko. Okrushko.
Okrushko.
Come on, Okrushko.
Speaking of cool people.
All right. So, yeah. So me and Alex are new. I mean, you've got Mike and Brandon and Tim who've been on there. And there's a lot of other people that also make up the team. That just a long list. It's on our website, and in fact, I think it'll be, when we get version 8 released, ngrx.io, there'll be an about area. So, I just say, if you have any questions about NgRx, check the docs first, but also feel free to reach out to any of us on Twitter or email or GitHub. File an issue there. Check the issues. We'll help you.
If you have questions about NgRx, you just talk to Wes. He'll help you out.
If I don't know the answer, I'll find someone that does for sure. So, so with NgRx version 8, and I'll just say I can't give you an exact date, or Brandon would kill me, but I think we're shooting for sometime around the end of this week. So it's very soon.
I don't believe you. Brandon would never kill anybody. He's the nicest person on the face of the earth.
He really is. He's a good laid back southern boy from Alabama, just like me from Florida. It's close. So
Yeah. Mike
um,
Ryan might kill you. He's pretty scary. I'm just kidding, Mike.
so kind of the, one of the kind of the themes you'll see with version 8 is, we always talk about boilerplate. There's so much verbosity to code and, all these things you have to do. I personally don't have a problem with that. I think it's, explicit declarative code, which is good. But we've added some features that are really going to kind of quell some of those concerns with version 8. And basically, I'll just dive right in. We've got some new creator functions. So you've probably seen create selector, right? Just way to set up a memoized selector. Well, we're going to continue with that theme, and we have these new creators called create action, create reducer, create effect, and with those, we're moving away from the decorator way of doing things, more to the functional way. And we took inspiration from Nicholas Jameson's TS action library that he had out there. So a big part of what these are, we took inspiration from that, and I'll provide links. Nicholas has an article about that as well. So I'll dive in and show some examples of the reduction in code, but just know that we're going to have these new ones. Now, this doesn't mean you can't do it the current way, where you have a switch statement for a reducer, or you have actions as classes, or you have the effect with an effect decorator. It just means this is a new additional way with some additional features. Another big thing, you probably heard this, is John Papa and Ward Bell's ngRx data. We have merged that into version 8. So it's now an official module in our library. And you can add it with an ngadd ngRx data command. So it's an official part of that. We've also added some runtime checks. There was a library, an additional library you can install that was ngRx store freeze. And so to do like immutability checks and is something serializable, those kind of things, used to have an external library for now. Well, with version 8, we've rolled those in to just kind of the baked in ngRx. Those are good at development time, especially if you're new to ngRx and learning things. They'll throw some errors for you if you try to mutate things.
And is that something that will turn on with a flag? So it'll be off by default, and then we turn it on?
Yeah, it's off by default, and in the and I'll show you in a minute. But the .for root on the store module, basically you would pass in an options object and set it.
Nice.
All right. So again, I talked about the create action reducer functions were inspired by the TS action library from Nicholas. And when you guys see we send out the slides, you can hit this link up, and Nicholas wrote a whole blog about it. So version 7, you might have two actions that look like this, right? You might have a login and a log out action. And there's really kind of three things going on. You've got your enum, which is your action types. You've got your classes for each action with a constructor with a payload property, for example. And then you've got your actions union that you're going to export for use in maybe your reducer or your effects. With version 8, you end up with this. It's a lot less code. The idea is you use these creators, and these are kind of type safe functions where login just becomes, export a const of login equal to create action. You pass in the type, and then if there's props, you pass in you pass in this props function and define the object there. And then the way these are used in the reducer, you no longer need to create those three kind of separate things, a full set of enums and a class and export a union. So a lot of people are a big fan of this. Alex as well has written a really good article kind of describing how to use these, kind of the ins and outs of them. So I would recommend folks reading that to get more information. Reducer, right? So we have, kind of current V7, a reducer is a switch statement. Looks very similar to something you use in Redux or other libraries. And this kind of way of doing it still, like I said, will work in version 8, but with version 8, we have a new way with this create reducer. And so again, it's a lot less boilerplate code. You have more type safety and checking of things, and you kind of have this declarative way of creating a reducer like this. And so you pass in the initial state, and then you pass in a series of ons, and on the home action or the scoreboard action of home score, return the state like this. So it's just another way, another option for folks. The last one is effect. Today that's a decorator. Might look like this, a load movies effect, where if a load movies action was dispatched, it's going to go and do a get all on that, and pipe it to a success action if it works. With version 8, this is no longer a decorator, it's a creator function. And so it just becomes a create effect where you pass it a handler to run, right?
And then is there a like an options array that we'll be able to pass if we want to not have it dispatch in action?
Yeah,
Or something like that.
I will confirm that, but I believe it's the second parameter to it. You can pass the options, so you can say dispatch false. We have an experimental new feature that's like resubscribe on error. Not sure if it's going to land in V8 first release, but it might. But that's also another option you could set. So yes, that is correct.
That's very cool. That would make another great episode. Maybe we need to do something on that, like handling errors and restarting when in your effects, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we don't need an episode with the new version, like it's all handled for us.
I do think we should have more episodes with Wes.
What's up?
You're doing a great job, Wes.
Oh, thanks.
I agree.
Don't put your head.
You guys are really easy to talk to, so I feel like you're family already. So last thing, well, not last thing, second to last thing, I'm trying to hurry so we don't run out of time here, is the runtime checks. And so these kind of guide developers to follow the ngRx and Redux core concepts and best practices. And you can turn these on during development, and if a rule is violated, an error is thrown, notifying you what and where, what went wrong and where something went wrong.
That's cool.
And these are okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
So to do it, you basically pass an options object into the store module .for root, and there's 4 properties. And some of these are kind of a carryover from the store freeze module that existed before. But the idea is you can, strict state immutability. You can verify the state doesn't get mutated directly. You can verify actions aren't mutated, and you can verify that your state can actually be serialized and your action can be serialized. So these are really good tools for development. I don't think it's recommended to leave them on in production. It's probably performance issues with that, but at least for development processes, they're really great to have.
I think this is really important, right? I see it as really important because this is the equation of when we're working with ngRx and state management and the immutability and keeping that in check, that ends up falling on us as developers to identify, visualize, see, and implement in that way, right? And it's really hard to know when you violated that, especially when you're working with the state or something in a different area, a different file or whatnot. And so how do you make sure that developers can, make sure that the code they write adheres to that when it's not always telling that you look at the code and see that you're breaking that immutability case? So this catches that catch in there, right? That allows us to ensure that we haven't violated that with our code. And I think that's super important.
Absolutely. I mean, I think on a past episode, you guys talked about immutable JS, and in my mind, this is kind of, if you're using ngRx, you might not need it. So this could be a good development tool. So the last thing is, we've been working on some updates to the docs and the website. And so, obviously we're going to have documentation for our new features in V8. We're going to have some information on how to migrate from prior versions to V8. We've cleaned up the navigation on the left-hand side, and I'll pop over the docs real fast and show you. We've integrated all of the ngRx data documentation into it, and we've added. This is a particularly cool one that I like. I'm happy about is we've added a contributing page. We really want people to find contributing to ngRx to be an easy process with as little friction as possible. And so this page, you're going to go to this page, and it's basically going to tell you how our code's laid out. What are the files and folders at that you need to go to change certain things. How do you get it running locally? How do you go through the pull request process? All of that, and it's kind of laid out in depth. And we've even popped that video on there with Jan and Brandon where they talk about contributing to docs for RxJS and ngRx. And so that has been added. Used to be kind of split across the repo in like a contributing markdown file and other places. But now we've kind of we're going to centralize that into one place. So I'll just hop over real fast and show you the new, until it's released, which maybe by the time this podcast is kind of published, it will be released. But until then, you can get to it by going to next.ngrx.io.
Now, you do know we're live, right? So it's like already published, this podcast.
That's true. Yeah, for the live listeners, absolutely. For those that wait and listen in their car, on the drive to work or whatever, they might be good. So
good call.
But yeah, so up on the right-hand corner, if you go to docs, just real quick, we've organized our sections now really by the modules you install. So now it's at ngRx store. That's the module you would install. And then we have our information. And then down here at the bottom is our new contributing page where, as you can see, a ton of information on how to get started. We're always asking for people to be a part of ngRx and contribute. We've got a ton of great people doing that already. And so, yeah, I think that's it for ngRx. Turn it back to you, Justin.
Nice. Wow, that's a lot of cool stuff coming down the pipe. So for sure. All right, well, we're at the top of the hour, so a little bit past the top of the hour. So I guess we'll get a couple quick picks. We had a couple of our panelists that had to go. They had a hard stop. So we don't get their picks, but we'll I'm sure we can include them somewhere. But
I have picks for all of us. And I have Mike and Austin's picks too. Just don't said that.
All right, well, Bonnie, why don't you give the rundown on those then?
I do actually. So I have oh no, you can't hear it. Hold on. And I have Mike and Austin's picks too.
There you go.
Yeah.
Team.
So I just wanted to remind everybody that the whole entire NgAir crew is going to be at Angular Denver, which is why the A-Team theme song was playing, and I messed it up, but it was going to be really cool in my mind. Anyway, but we really are all going to be in Denver, all of us, and it's going to be lit, and it's going to be super fun and super silly, and you all have to come with us and hang out. That's my pick.
Cool.
Awesome. Were you going to share the other people's picks too? Did you say or?
No, I had all their picks and I just took them and turned them into mine.
I gotcha. Okay, gotcha. All right.
That's a good pick for all of us. We're all going to be there.
Yeah, perfect. Wes,
Austin said.
Yeah, my pick, I'm going to say, is Preston Lamb. Has got a new library that he's working on, a UI library that's supposed to be kind of style agnostic. And it's called NGX Plug and Play. And if you follow him on Twitter at PLamWeb, you can find more information about that. So,
That is such a good pick, Wes. And actually, Preston Lamb was on NG Houston this morning, and he did a demo of that this morning. So you can also find that on NG Houston. And speaking of which, that reminds me of another pick, because we have John Rista on Angular Air next week, showing us Auto Entity, which is another new library. So you said Preston, and it reminded me because we had a double header this morning, and we had Preston and John on NG Houston. But yeah, Preston, that was a pretty good library he did. And I wanted to come on and show us like how he wrote that. So I think that might roll into another episode because it was actually very cool.
I got one more pick I just thought of. Sonder Elias, I think is how you pronounce it. Met him at ngConf, and he's got a library that's called ng Observable Form, I believe it is. It's a really cool take on kind of reactive forms with observables. So maybe check that out.
Anything Sonder does, you should definitely check out.
Yeah.
Sonder, like I didn't know what to think of Sonder in the beginning. He's like a Ward Bell, because you see him across the room. Well, Ward Bell you can't miss because he's usually wearing something wild and crazy. But Sonder he doesn't dress wild and crazy, and he's very quiet. I didn't really know him that well, but like once you get to know him, he's very, very, very smart. And also he's so nice. He's one of my favorite people.
Yeah, he took, an hour and sat down with me in ngConf and showed me his code and explained it. I thought that was awesome. So he's a cool guy.
He is, like, you would never know Sonder because he's not the type to like walk up to strangers, but if you go and talk to him, he's the nicest guy, and he has like so much knowledge in his brain.
Yeah.
Love you, Sonder.
And just a little plug there to get the origin story of that library. He actually came on and did an episode on Angular Air a while back, and I believe it was talking about the foundations of this library that you're talking about. So he kind of gave us a pre look at it. So that was pretty cool. So check that episode out too.
Cool.
I think we should have him back for another episode because I miss Sonder. I haven't seen him in a week, and I think we need to have him back on the show.
All right. Well, that's a wrap. Wes, thanks a ton for sharing your time, coming on, sharing this content. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's great to be here.
Awesome. We're so glad we finally got you on here, and we'll have to get you back for another episode. So let's plan something for sure.
Sounds good.
All right, everybody. Take it easy. We'll catch you next time. Later.
Bye.